True story, my DIL said I was a maid, so I revealed what her husbands will said. Have you ever poured your entire being, every ounce of your love and sacrifice, into raising a child, only to watch them, as an adult, choose someone else over your very dignity? Have you ever felt that profound sting of betrayal, that slow, agonizing erosion of your self-worth, as your own son stands by, silent and complicit, while his wife dissects your spirit piece by painful piece? Have you ever had to choose between your child's perceived happiness and your own survival? I have, my dear. I watched it happen, not just once, but countless times, until the very last drop of my patience dried up like a forgotten well in a desert. But they didn't know, did they? They didn't know I would be the one to write the final, most unexpected chapter of their story. They thought I was just an old woman, a relic, easily dismissed. Oh, how wrong they were. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, exotic flowers, and the clinking of crystal glasses. It was Zara's grandest party yet, a display of her newfound social prowess, an opulent spectacle designed to impress the city's elite. I was there, as I often was, in the periphery, a silent shadow in the bustling kitchen, helping the caterers arrange canapés and ensure the champagne flutes were constantly refilled. It was a role I'd quietly adopted over the years, a way to feel useful, to be involved without being an imposition, or so I told myself. My son, Orion, Zara's husband, was out there, mingling, laughing, his arm around his beautiful wife, oblivious to my presence, or perhaps, deliberately ignoring it. He looked so polished, so confident, so, unlike the boy I raised. I was meticulously arranging miniature quiches on a silver tray when I heard Zara's voice, cutting through the general hum of conversation like a sharp knife. She was standing by the open kitchen doorway, her back to me, but her voice, amplified by the high ceilings and her natural theatricality, carried clearly. "Oh, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with an exaggerated sweetness that always set my teeth on edge, "don't worry about a thing. We have ample staff tonight. There's no need for you to lift a finger." A pause. I heard a nervous giggle from one of her guests. Zara continued, her voice dropping slightly, but still perfectly audible, meant to be heard by more than just the person she was addressing. "Really, it's quite unnecessary. We have the help here. Our personal maid, if you will. She's rather good at keeping things running smoothly, aren't you, Celeste?" My name, spoken like a casual afterthought, a label, not a person. My hands froze over the quiches. Celeste, not Mom, not Orion's mother, not even Mrs. Hayes. Just Celeste, followed by the help and our personal maid. The words weren't directed at me, not directly. They were thrown into the air, a barbed joke for her guests, a public declaration of my diminished status. She hadn't even turned to look at me, but I felt her eyes, the invisible gaze of her influential friends, all landing on my back. I could feel their curious, slightly amused glances, wondering about the personal maid she referred to so casually. The heat rushed to my face, not from the kitchen's warmth, but from a burning shame that threatened to consume me. I looked down at my hands, at the tiny fluted pastry crusts, and saw them trembling. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against my ribs. Orion was there, just a few feet away from Zara, a glass of champagne in his hand. He was laughing, a hearty, full-throated laugh, at something one of the guests had just said. He couldn't have missed it. Zara had practically shouted it. He must have heard. He had to have heard. My eyes flickered up, past Zara's perfectly coiffed blonde hair, past the glittering diamond earrings that dangled from her lobes, to Orion. He was looking at her, a faint smile playing on his lips as she finished her little performance. He didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He didn't say, "Zara, that's my mother you're talking about." He didn't say, "Celeste is a guest, not the help." He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Silent. Acknowledging her words with the faintest of nods, a complicit agreement to my public degradation. That was it. The final, crushing blow. It wasn't just Zara's cruelty anymore, it was Orion's deafening silence. His betrayal. The pain of her words paled in comparison to the agony of his inaction. It was as if he'd picked up a stone and thrown it, not at me, but at the last fragile pane of glass holding my composure. It shattered. And in that moment, a quiet, cold resolve settled deep within my bones. The trembling stopped. The shame was replaced by something else entirely, a fierce, burning determination. They didn't know it yet, but they had just signed their own death warrant, and I, Celeste Hayes, the personal maid, was about to deliver it. And you think this was the first time? Oh, if only, my dear. If only that grand party had been the solitary stain on the tapestry of my life. No, that night was merely the culmination, the final straw that broke a camel's back already burdened beyond belief. Zara had been chipping away at my dignity, brick by painful brick, ever since she entered our lives. And Orion, my sweet, once attentive Orion, had been her silent accomplice, his love for her blinding him to her cruelty, or perhaps, simply making him too weak to intervene. Before Zara, there was Robert, my late husband, the anchor of my world. Robert was not just a man of immense wealth, he was a man of profound integrity, a visionary with an uncanny understanding of human nature. Our life together was a tapestry woven with shared dreams, quiet laughter, and an unwavering mutual respect. He built Hayes Industries from the ground up, not just with shrewd business acumen, but with a deep-seated belief in honesty and loyalty. Our home, this very house, was a sanctuary, filled with the warmth of family and the echoes of our shared history. Robert was meticulous in everything he did, from balancing the company books to pruning our rose garden. He taught me the value of foresight, of looking beyond the immediate, and of planning for every conceivable contingency. And then there was Orion, our son. He was the light of our lives, a kind, gentle boy with a soft heart and an eagerness to please. I remember his laughter echoing through these very halls, his small hand tucked firmly in mine as we walked through the garden, him helping me bake cookies in the kitchen. He was never boisterous or defiant, but rather quiet and sensitive. Perhaps too sensitive, too eager to avoid conflict, a trait Robert, with his pragmatic wisdom, sometimes worried about. He needs to learn to stand his ground, Celeste, he'd say, a faint furrow between his brows. The world can be a brutal place, and a gentle heart needs a strong backbone. I always brushed it off, seeing only the sweetness in my son. Oh, if only I had understood the weight of Robert's words then. Robert was diagnosed with a rare illness 5 years before he passed. It was a slow, insidious decline, giving us time, painful as it was, to prepare. During those months, as his body weakened, his mind remained sharp, perhaps even sharper. He spent countless hours with his lawyer, Mr. Davies, restructuring his estate, not just for the present, but for a future he wouldn't see. He often spoke of his concerns about the evolving financial landscape, about the importance of protecting the company's core values. But looking back, I realize his true concern was more personal. He saw something, even in those nascent stages, in the few interactions he had with Zara, that gave him pause. A glint of avarice, a certain calculated charm, a disregard for sentimentality that made him uneasy. He saw how easily Orion, with his gentle, pliable nature, could be swayed, how his innocent desire for happiness could be exploited. And so, he prepared. He always prepared for everything. Do you remember when Orion first introduced me to Zara? She was dazzling, I'll give her that. All sharp angles and bright smiles, with a laugh that tinkled like wind chimes. My late husband, Robert, had been gone for 5 years then, and it had just been Orion and me in our large, quiet house. I was so hopeful. A daughter-in-law. Someone to share holidays with, to talk to, a new burst of life. I welcomed her with open arms, with a heart overflowing with a mother's joy that her son had found happiness. I remember telling her, "This house is yours now too, dear. Make yourself at home." I meant it with every fiber of my being, believing she would cherish it as I did. Oh, the bitter irony of those words now, echoing in the silence of my reclaimed home. The subtle jabs started almost immediately, so subtle at first that I dismissed them as mere differences in personality, or perhaps my own oversensitivity, the natural awkwardness of a new dynamic. "Oh, Celeste, you're still using those old silver polish cloths. We really must get you some proper industrial cleaners. Your silver looks a bit tarnished." Or, "Mother, please, the antique teacups are for display, not for everyday use. You'll chip them. They're so fragile, almost like something from a museum." She'd say it with a sweet smile, but her eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, would always betray a hint of disdain. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the dismissive wave of her hand, the way she'd talk about me to Orion, even when I was standing right there. "Orion, your mother leaves the lights on everywhere. It's such a waste of electricity, darling. We really must be more mindful." "Never, Mom, you forgot the lights." Always a pronouncement, a judgment, delivered to Orion as if I were a child who needed supervision, a problem to be managed. I'd feel a prickle of discomfort, a tightening in my chest, but then Orion would laugh it off, or Zara would quickly change the subject, leaving me to wonder if I was truly just being overly sensitive. Then came the suggestions, which quickly morphed into demands. My carefully tended rose garden, which Robert and I had spent years cultivating, nurturing each bloom, was suddenly too messy and needed modernizing. "Celeste, darling, those rambling roses are simply too provincial. We need something sleeker, more architectural. A proper minimalist design that flows with the clean lines of the house. My beloved antique furniture, pieces collected over a lifetime, each with its own story, were clutter that needed to be replaced with sleek, minimalist designs. The old mahogany desk Robert had worked at, the embroidered armchair I used for reading, the china cabinet filled with heirlooms, they were all deemed obsolete. And the way she started taking over the house, piece by piece. She redecorated the living room without asking, moving my cherished family photos into a dusty corner of the den, replacing them with abstract art she bought at some trendy gallery in a fit of self-important artistic expression. She changed the kitchen layout, the one I'd used for decades, to suit her entertaining needs. My spices were moved, my favorite pots and pans relegated to the back of obscure cupboards. I remember standing there, watching her direct the movers, feeling like a ghost in my own home, a stranger in the very walls that had once cradled my life. My protests were met with a blank stare, then a saccharine smile, and the words, "Oh, Celeste, it's for the best. You'll see. It's so much more modern." And Orion? He'd just nod along. "Zara has a good eye, Mom. It's time for a change." "A change," he said. "Not our change, but her change." His silence became my torment. Every time Zara subtly belittled me, every time she made me feel irrelevant, I'd look to Orion, hoping for a flicker of recognition, a sign that he saw what was happening, that he remembered who I was to him. But his eyes would be fixed on Zara, a placid, almost hypnotized expression on his face. He'd just smile, or shrug, or, worse, agree with her. "Yes, Mom, Zara's right. That old armchair is a bit worn out. We should get something more comfortable, like the one Zara picked out for the den." It was as if he was losing himself, piece by piece, becoming an extension of her will. The son I knew, the kind, protective boy, was fading, replaced by this agreeable, submissive man. The grief of watching him slip away was a constant ache in my chest. The physical demand started subtly too. "Oh, Celeste, could you just run to the market for me? I'm so busy with work, darling, and I really need those artisanal cheeses for tonight." Then it became, "Celeste, the dry cleaning needs to be picked up. And the groceries. And the car needs washing. You're already going out, aren't you?" Soon, I was practically her personal assistant, running errands, cooking meals for her friends when her caterer cancelled at the last minute, even helping her organize her overflowing closet, folding her silk scarves and arranging her designer shoes. I remember one particular instance. She had a last-minute dinner party, and her celebrity chef called in sick. "Zara, instead of rescheduling or ordering takeout, just turned to me, her eyes wide with feigned helplessness. "Celeste, you're such a wonderful cook. Your beef bourguignon is simply divine. Could you possibly whip something up for us? Just a simple 3-course meal for 12. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're so good at it." And Orion, standing right there, didn't say a word. He just gave me an encouraging smile, as if it were a perfectly reasonable request, as if I were a hired hand. I cooked that entire meal, standing on my feet for hours, my back aching, while Zara entertained her guests in the living room, occasionally popping into the kitchen to offer suggestions and make sure the appetizers were flowing. I felt a deep humiliation, a profound sense of injustice, but I bit my tongue, desperate to avoid conflict, desperate for a sliver of the old Orion to re-emerge. I started feeling like a maid, a silent fixture in my own home, there to serve and nothing more. My friends would visit, and Zara would barely acknowledge them, or she'd cut our conversations short with an urgent, "Orion needs me," or, "Celeste, darling, could you please see to the refreshments? My guests are thirsty." My own social life withered. I found myself making excuses not to meet friends, too ashamed to admit how I was being treated, how my own son allowed it. I even started dressing more plainly, trying to be less noticeable, less of a target, trying to blend into the background of my own life. It was a slow, insidious erosion of my self-worth, a quiet death by 1,000 cuts. I started to believe that perhaps I was just old and useless, a burden. There were times, oh, there were so many times, I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake Orion and demand to know why he was doing this to me, his own mother, the woman who had nurtured him, sacrificed for him, loved him unconditionally. But I held back. Always. For his sake, I told myself. I didn't want to cause a rift between them. I didn't want to make his life harder, to jeopardize his marriage. I believed, with a desperate, naive hope, that one day he would see through Zara's manipulations, that he would remember the mother who loved him unconditionally, the one who sacrificed everything for him. I waited, and I suffered in silence, clinging to the fading hope that my son would eventually choose me. But he never did. He just drifted further and further away, a puppet on Zara's strings, his eyes vacant, his love for me seemingly replaced by a blind adoration for her. Each passing year, each new slight, each ignored plea from my heart, cemented the realization, I was losing my son. The final public humiliation at Zara's party wasn't just a breaking point, it was the moment I realized that the son I knew was already gone, replaced by a stranger who valued his wife's approval more than his mother's dignity. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act. But they didn't know about the final secret my late husband, Robert, left me. They didn't know about the meticulous planning, the foresight, the deep understanding of human nature that my brilliant husband possessed. Robert was a man of immense wealth, yes, but he was also a man who valued integrity and family above all else. He had seen the early signs, even before his passing, of a certain ambition, a certain ruthlessness in Zara that made him uneasy. He saw how easily Orion could be swayed, how his gentle nature, which I adored, could be exploited. And so, he prepared. He always prepared for everything. I remember the day his lawyer, Mr. Davies, a man as precise and honorable as Robert himself, handed me a sealed envelope after the initial will reading. "Celeste," he had said, his voice low and serious, the lines of concern etched around his eyes, "Robert wanted you to have this. He said to open it only if you ever felt your family's legacy, or your own well-being, was truly threatened by someone who lacked the moral compass he believed was essential for stewardship. He called it his ultimate safeguard, a measure of last resort." I remembered his words even then, the weight of them. Robert had foreseen this. He had always known the potential for darkness in people, and he had built a fortress around me. Inside, nestled among layers of legal parchment, was a second, highly confidential addendum to Robert's will. It wasn't just a simple will that left everything to Orion. Oh no, Robert was far too clever for that. He had built-in safeguards, conditions, a series of tripwires designed to protect his legacy, his company, and more importantly, me. He knew I might be too soft, too forgiving, too unwilling to fight for myself. He gave me the tools to do so. The core of the secret was a set of specific clauses tied to Orion's inheritance and the overall control of the family assets, including a significant portion of the company's shares and the very house we lived in. The will stipulated that Orion would inherit the majority of the estate, yes, but with a crucial caveat: Celeste Hayes retained absolute, irrevocable control over a substantial portion of the company's non-voting shares, enough to give me significant leverage, and more importantly, the power to activate certain predefined conditions. The most potent of these conditions was related to the concept of filial respect and familial harmony. It was worded in careful, legalistic terms, but the meaning was crystal clear: if it was ever determined, by a neutral third party, which the will specified as a panel of Robert's most trusted long-term business associates, men he knew would uphold his values, that Orion or his spouse had engaged in a pattern of sustained, demonstrable disrespect, neglect, or emotional abuse towards me, or had significantly undermined the family's core values as defined in the will, then a series of events would be triggered. Robert had even included a clause about public humiliation and degradation of family elders as specific triggers, as if he had seen the scene in Zara's ballroom playing out in his mind's eye. Firstly, my non-voting shares would convert to voting shares, giving me the majority control of the company's board. Secondly, a trust would be immediately established, placing a significant portion of Orion's inheritance into my direct management, with funds disbursed to him only under my approval for what was deemed prudent and necessary living expenses, effectively cutting off his unrestricted access to the vast fortune. And finally, the family home, which Zara believed was hers by right of marriage, would revert entirely to my ownership, with the right to reside there exclusively, and Orion and his spouse would be required to vacate within 90 days. It was a brilliant, devastatingly effective trump card, a silent promise from my beloved Robert that I would never be truly alone or helpless. For years, that envelope lay tucked away in a safe deposit box, a silent guardian. I never wanted to use it. I clung to the hope that Zara would change, that Orion would wake up, that we could be a normal family, fractured but perhaps salvageable. I told myself it was for Orion's happiness, for the stability of his marriage. But as Zara's disrespect escalated, as Orion's silence became a constant, suffocating presence, I started to revisit the idea. Each slight, each belittling remark, each time I was treated like the help, pushed me closer to the edge. I began, almost unconsciously, to document. Small notes in a hidden journal, dates and details of specific incidents. I didn't know why, not consciously, but something in me, perhaps Robert's spirit, nudged me to collect the evidence, to be as meticulous as he was. That night, at Zara's party, as I stood there in the kitchen, listening to her call me the help, and seeing Orion's complicit silence, the decision solidified. The humiliation wasn't just a personal affront, it was a public declaration of war. She wasn't just disrespecting me, she was disrespecting Robert's legacy, his family, everything he had built. She had triggered every single condition Robert had so carefully laid out. I felt a surge of strength, cold and clear. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. It was about honoring Robert's memory and reclaiming the dignity they had so relentlessly tried to strip away. My resolve hardened, cool and sharp as steel. I would not let Robert's foresight be in vain. I would not let Zara destroy the family he cherished, nor would I let her walk all over me, or him, any longer. This was it. This was the moment. I would use the trump card, not out of spite, but out of necessity. For justice. For my late husband's memory. And for the dignity I had so foolishly allowed them to strip away. The game was over. And I, the personal maid, was about to reveal the hand I had been holding all along. And then, the day came, the day everything would be laid bare. It wasn't a formal family dinner, nor a stuffy will reading in a lawyer's office. No, that wouldn't have been Zara's style, nor mine now. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of poetic justice. The day of reckoning was the very same day as Zara's lavish party, the very same night she chose to publicly humiliate me. I decided right then, standing in that kitchen, that there would be no delay. The conditions had been met. The fuse had been lit. After her cruel little performance by the kitchen door, where she designated me as the help, I took a deep breath. My hands, which had been trembling with shame, were now steady with purpose. I finished arranging the quiches, my movements precise and deliberate, each placement a silent act of defiance. I pushed the silver tray out to a passing waiter, then I straightened my apron, smoothed my hair, and walked out of the kitchen, not towards the back exit, but directly into the heart of the bustling ballroom. The air still hummed with chatter and laughter. The string quartet played a light, classical tune. Zara was holding court near the grand fireplace, sparkling under the crystal chandeliers, surrounded by her adoring, influential circle. Orion was right beside her, a picture of marital bliss, his head thrown back in laughter at one of her witty remarks. They didn't notice me at first, a woman in a simple dark dress and an apron, moving with quiet determination through the glittering crowd. I walked past the ornate pillars, past the tables laden with exquisite food and expensive wine, past the faces of society's elite, towards the center of the room. My gaze was fixed on Zara, a calm, unwavering focus. When I was about 10 feet away, I stopped. The general murmur of conversation seemed to dim around me, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. My pulse was a steady drum in my ears, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. I reached into the small, hidden pocket sewn into the lining of my dress, a precaution I'd taken that very morning, a subtle act of defiance even before I knew I'd use it tonight. My fingers closed around the thick, official-looking envelope. The paper felt cool and solid in my grasp, a promise of retribution. "Zara," I said, my voice clear and surprisingly steady, cutting through the background noise. It wasn't loud, but it had a peculiar resonance that made heads turn, like a bell chiming unexpectedly in a busy market. Zara, caught mid-sentence, paused. Her eyes, which had been sparkling with self-satisfaction, narrowed as she recognized me. A flicker of irritation crossed her face, quickly replaced by a patronizing smile. "Celeste, dear," she began, her tone dismissive, already dismissing me as an inconvenience, "are you quite finished in the kitchen? Perhaps you could ensure the champagne flutes are being refilled, darling, we're rather low over here." I didn't let her finish. I took another step forward, pulling the envelope from my pocket, holding it aloft just enough for her to see the official seal. "Actually, Zara," I interrupted, my voice gaining strength, resonating with a quiet authority I hadn't felt in years, "I am quite finished with the kitchen. And with a great many other things as well." A hush began to fall over her immediate circle. People started to notice. The smile dropped from Zara's face, replaced by a look of bewildered annoyance, a hint of suspicion. "What on earth are you talking about, Celeste?" she demanded, her voice sharper now, edged with impatience, her tone betraying her thinly veiled anger at being interrupted. I held up the envelope, letting its weight and official appearance speak volumes. "This, Zara, contains the final addendum to Robert's will. The one you and Orion were not privy to." My eyes flickered to Orion, who was now staring at me, his smile gone, a flicker of confusion and dawning apprehension in his eyes. He seemed to shrink slightly, sensing the shift in the air. Zara scoffed, a brittle laugh that rang false, a desperate attempt to maintain her composure. "Don't be ridiculous, Celeste. The will was read years ago. Everything is settled. This is a private party, mother, not a solicitor's office." "Oh, it was settled, indeed," I agreed, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. "Settled with foresight and conditions, Zara. Conditions that you, my dear, have now irrevocably triggered." I then turned to the crowd, to her influential guests, many of whom were now openly staring, their conversations dying out completely, their faces a mix of curiosity and discomfort. "My late husband, Robert Hayes, was a man of great wisdom and foresight," I announced, raising my voice slightly so it carried through the stunned silence. "He understood the importance of family, of respect, and of dignity. And he built safeguards into his estate to protect those values, and to protect me, in the event that his wishes were ever disregarded. I felt the collective gaze of the room, but it no longer bothered me. I stood tall, my posture radiating a newfound strength. I looked directly at Zara, her face now a mask of incredulity mixed with a nascent fear. Her perfectly made-up features seemed to freeze. Orion, beside her, looked utterly shell-shocked. His eyes darted between me and Zara, then to the guests, his face paling, a faint tremor running through his hand as he clutched his champagne glass. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, trapped between his wife's furious gaze and his mother's calm, devastating revelation. His silence, the very silence that had broken my heart just moments before, now amplified the weight of my words. Robert's will, I continued, enunciating each word carefully, letting each syllable land with precision, contains specific clauses. Clauses that stipulate that if his surviving spouse, Celeste Hayes, were ever subjected to a pattern of demonstrable disrespect, neglect, or public humiliation by his son or his son's spouse, then certain financial and proprietary conditions would be immediately activated. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers, a wave of shock washing over the opulent room. Zara's jaw dropped. Her eyes were wide, her breath caught in her throat. "You're mad," she hissed, her voice a desperate whisper, barely audible above the stunned silence. "This is insane. Orion, say something. Tell her she's delusional." Orion, however, remained rooted to the spot, his face ashen, his mouth slightly agape. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He looked at me, then at Zara, then back to me, utterly speechless, paralyzed by the weight of the moment. "Just moments ago, in front of many of you," I stated, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering a triumphant rhythm against my ribs, Zara referred to me as the help and our personal maid. That, among a litany of other instances over the years, constitutes a clear and unequivocal violation of the will's conditions regarding public humiliation and sustained disrespect. I held her gaze, letting the truth of my words sink into her. I then opened the envelope and pulled out a single, concisely worded document, which I had prepared with Mr. Davies just hours before. The ink was still fresh, the legal language stark and undeniable. "As of this moment, Zara," I declared, holding up the document for all to see, "a death warrant for her carefully constructed life. My non-voting shares in Hayes Industries have converted to voting shares, giving me majority control of the board. Furthermore, a trust has been established, placing a significant portion of Orion's inheritance into my direct management, to be dispersed only at my discretion for what is deemed prudent. And this house," I swept my hand around the opulent ballroom, encompassing the crystal, the art, the very air she breathed, "this house, which you believed was yours by right of marriage, now reverts entirely to my sole ownership. You and Orion have 90 days to vacate the premises." The silence in the room was absolute, so profound you could almost hear the collective gasp of the guests, a palpable tension filling the air. Zara's face went from pale to ghastly white, her eyes wide, fixed on me, not with anger, but with pure, unadulterated terror. Her empire, built on pretense and cruelty, was crumbling before her very eyes, exposed for the fragile, ill-gotten gains they were. The glittering facade of her perfect party, her perfect life, had shattered into a million pieces. Orion finally stirred. He took a hesitant step towards me, his hand outstretched, his voice a choked whisper, filled with a raw, undeniable pain. "Mom, what have you done?" I looked at him, my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had let me be treated like a servant. There was regret in his eyes, true regret, but it was too little, too late. The dam of my long-held sorrow broke, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. "Orion," I said, my voice softened by the weight of years of neglect, "I haven't done anything that wasn't set in motion by your father's wisdom, and by your wife's, and your own, actions. You stood by silently, my son, while I was systematically stripped of my dignity. You watched her treat me like the help. This is not what I have done. This is the consequence of what you both allowed to happen." I turned from him then, the message delivered, the chapter closed. The guests, her influential friends, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. The powerful dynamic she had so carefully constructed had just been exposed, and she, the seemingly untouchable queen, was suddenly revealed to be a mere pawn, stripped of her power, her wealth, her very home. The climax wasn't a shouting match, it was a quiet, devastating pronouncement, delivered with the calm authority of a woman who had finally reclaimed her voice, and her power. "So where is my daughter-in-law who called me the maid now, you ask? Ah, that's a story in itself, isn't it?" The downfall was swift, and frankly, quite spectacular. Zara, with her fragile ego and insatiable need for outward validation, couldn't handle it. The public humiliation at her own party, the immediate social ostracism from her high society friends who quickly turned their backs, was a crushing blow. Suddenly, the phone stopped ringing. Invitations to exclusive events ceased to arrive. Her Instagram, once a beacon of aspirational luxury, went silent. She was no longer the dazzling hostess, but the subject of whispers and condescending looks. Her carefully constructed world, built on borrowed status and inherited wealth, dissolved like sugar in hot tea, leaving only a bitter residue. The 90-day eviction notice was served officially the very next morning by Mr. Davies himself. Zara fought it, of course. She hired the most expensive lawyers, threatened to sue, ranted and raved, claiming mental distress and a malicious plot. But Robert's will was ironclad. Mr. Davies, bless his soul, had made sure of that. He presented the panel of Robert's trusted associates with the extensive documentation I had been meticulously collecting over the years, my hidden journal, copies of emails, even a few audio recordings I had discreetly made, capturing Zara's more blatant insults. Yes, I had learned to be just as prepared as Robert, observing Zara's pattern of behavior. Their verdict was unanimous. The conditions had been met. Zara's public pronouncements at the party were just the icing on the cake, irrefutable proof of her disdain. Watching her pack was bittersweet. She was a shell of her former self, haggard and furious, her designer clothes rumpled, her hair a mess. Her designer clothes were crammed into suitcases, her expensive shoes thrown haphazardly into boxes. She tried to take some of the antique furniture, claiming it was hers, that it was a gift, but I just pointed to the clause in the will that stated all contents of the house were part of the estate, now under my ownership. Her hands trembled as she realized the extent of her loss. She left with the few things she had brought into the marriage, her own clothes, her jewelry, a fraction of what she thought she deserved, a fraction of the fortune she had so callously squandered. I watched her leave, her expensive car pulling away, and felt nothing but a profound emptiness, not triumph, but a quiet, weary peace. And Orion? My son. He was broken. He stayed in the house until the last possible moment, helping Zara pack, moving around like a ghost, his shoulders slumped, his eyes haunted. He tried to talk to me, multiple times, his voice filled with a hollow regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I was so blind. She controlled everything." He tried to apologize, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, tears often streaming down his face. And I listened, truly listened, with a heavy heart. But the years of silent complicity, the countless indignities, the erosion of my very soul, they weren't easily erased. The trust, once shattered, takes an eternity to rebuild, if it ever can. I offered him a small sum from the trust, enough to get him started, but he refused, saying he needed to earn his own way. It was a small sign of the old Orion, the one who took responsibility. He moved into a small apartment with Zara, a stark contrast to the mansion they had called home. Their relationship, which had seemed so robust, so unbreakable, crumbled under the weight of financial ruin and bitter resentment. Zara blamed him, screamed at him for not protecting her, for letting my will, my secret, destroy their life. She cursed Robert's foresight, his vengeful spirit. He blamed himself for his weakness, for letting her control him, for hurting me. The fortune they had taken for granted was gone, or at least, controlled by me, for his prudent and necessary living expenses only. Orion, for the first time in his adult life, had to truly work for a living, starting from the bottom in a company, not his father's, but a new one, as a junior executive. Zara eventually left him. She couldn't stand the lack of luxury, the loss of her social standing, the constant reminder of her fall from grace. I heard she moved to a different city, trying to reinvent herself, but she never regained the status she once had. The lesson, for her, was brutal: you can't build a life on disrespect and greed. For Orion, the lesson was painful but perhaps necessary. He learned, the hard way, what true loyalty means, and what it costs to sacrifice your principles for someone else's fleeting approval. He's slowly, painstakingly, trying to rebuild his life. He calls me now, not often, but sometimes. There's still a chasm between us, a raw wound that might never fully heal, but at least he's trying to cross it. He's a different man, chastened, perhaps wiser, less afraid to stand up for himself. And I hope for him. I truly do. A mother's love, even when wounded, never truly dies. As for me, I found a peace I hadn't known in years. I reclaimed my home, filled it with my own cherished memories and things, not Zara's cold, minimalist designs. The scent of Robert's pipe tobacco seems to linger in his old study. I tend my roses again, their thorny beauty a reminder of resilience, listening to the quiet hum of the house, no longer a stranger within its walls. I sit in the garden, sipping my tea, and sometimes, I talk to Robert, thanking him for his incredible foresight, his unwavering love that reached beyond the grave. I've regained my power, my dignity, and a quiet strength I didn't know I possessed. Never, ever, my dear, test anyone's patience to its limits, especially not the patience of a mother. Because when a mother's patience runs out, when her love is finally pushed to the breaking point, the consequences can be more devastating than any storm. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness, only to be cast aside? Have you ever felt that sting of betrayal, that slow, agonizing erosion of your self-worth? My channel has many similar stories of life lessons learned the hard way, of resilience, and of reclaiming your power. If you've gone through something similar, or if this story resonated with you, please subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss my next story, and most importantly, share your own troubles and thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay strong, my dears.